from shouldigetit.com. I am here in real life at Ferraris Online. I am with this Ferrari Testarossa, but I can't tell you much about it, so I'm gonna have Colleen tell you the story of this car, why it's so special, what to look out for on a test drive, and also why driving a classic Ferrari is so different, so much more fun than a modern day Ferrari. Check it out.
Hello, my name is Colleen Sheehan, and this is the Ferrari Testarossa. And while a lot of you may know this car from shows like Miami Vice or posters you had on the wall as a kid, it produces about 385 horsepower, and while that may be slightly less horsepower than your modern Mustang GT, I can promise you're gonna have a lot more fun in this car than you would any kind of modern car. So you are watching Answered. Most of the cars that you see behind me are cars that I have on consignment. I'm a Ferrari broker and I sell other European exotics and all kinds of cars. Mostly Ferrari, that's kind of my specialty. I like Enzo era cars. And basically a guy emailed me because somebody recommended me to him while at the Long Beach Grand Prix. And he shot me an email. I've sold many Testarossas before, so after chatting with him a while, I went over to his house, picked up the car. I've already done my little photos, video, all that on it, and we're gonna send it for a service and then advertise it. So I've always loved Testarossas. I think part of it is growing up as a 90s kid. It was just an icon to gearheads of that era, but functionality wise and how it drives as a 12-cylinder Ferrari, even though it's not like a front engine V12 like the real classic Ferraris, the mid-engine layout and the really wide rear end gives it this aggressive wide stance to it that is just, you look at it and you automatically A, know it's a Ferrari, and B, are attracted to it because it just has that like aggressive look that just, it makes me happy. Plus the sound of the car, the power of it, the balance because of how wide it is, it's just overall a really fun to drive car. It does pretty much everything you want. You got all the power you want, you have great handling, it's fairly comfortable, and as a continuation of the Boxer, which has long time been a favorite of mine, I really love it because it solves a lot of problems that the Boxer had while still keeping that classic 12-cylinder Ferrari feel to it. It has to be the service costs. Basically, Testarossas for a long time have been notoriously expensive to service. And that's because the giant engine in the rear of the car has to drop out the bottom in order to do the cam belts. So newer Ferraris like the 430 and on basically don't have belts. They went back to chains, which is great because that cuts down a lot of service costs. Ferrari, Testarossas and some other models, not so lucky. They're stuck in that cam belt era. So to do a belt service on this car starts at like 10,000 bucks. Sometimes you can get away with a little less, maybe 8 grand, but you're looking at 8,000 plus just for the belt service, which is like every 5 years, give or take, but still, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow for a 5-year service on a car.
You're given $10,000 to modify the car. What would you do?
So with that money for this car, I would probably just put it in the bank for future service costs, because if you own a Testarossa, it's just kind of baked into the cake. You know that the 5-year service, cam belt service, is gonna be about 10 grand. It comes with the territory with cam belt cars. The Testarossas are kind of notoriously more expensive than some other cars like 308s, but unlike 430s, which don't have the belts, you're looking at those costs. Now, if I had that 10 grand and I had this 430, that would be an entirely different story, because this car does not have the dreaded cam belts, it has the chains, so you don't have to worry about those huge service every 5 years or so. So if I had the 10 grand on this car, I'm a little bit more of a purist where I wouldn't do any like radical changes, but I think the black on black combo on this would just be a little more enhanced if it had red accent stitching in the seats. So I would definitely do that. The Pioneer radio that's currently in this car could definitely use an upgrade. And I would probably put a Tubi exhaust on it because I think Tubi has some amazing sounds to it, and that would probably eat up the 10 grand pretty quick. But those are the little mods I would make to this car to like personalize it, to make it more fit me a little bit more. But for the Testarossa, we do have some driving shots, so if you stay tuned, you'll see those and get a little more info on this car.
All right, so we're now on the road, and I have to ask you, probably the question that you get asked a lot when people look at these, what should you look for on a test drive? And how different can they feel?
Oh, they can feel very different. So the thing I love about old cars, they have their own personalities. And so something like a Testarossa, basically, as an older car, you want to, like, the basics are how does the engine sound, how does it pull, you know, if it has, like, if it doesn't pull strong when you're higher up and, you know, when you're, like, in the RPM range, then there might be a dead cylinder, something like that you want to look for. Does it shift smooth? Is the steering nice and tight? Does it brake in a straight line? Kind of the basics of does it drive well?
Yeah.
You know, so that's the main things that are just, you know, most important would probably be the engine pulling strong, because if it has a dead cylinder, that's an expensive fix.
Yeah.
It's not unfixable, but that's where the price tag goes way up.
Yeah. What do you recommend on the maintenance in terms of, like, how do you keep the maintenance interval as long as possible between engine outs?
Well, so the only reason you really need to do the engine out on these cars is because they have the belts, not the chains. So you want to make sure, depending on how much you drive, of course, belts need to be done roughly every 5 years. They could be a little bit more if you're, you know, if you're not driving it that much. If you happen to drive them a whole bunch, probably should do them a little more often. But that's kind of the general 5-year rule. And other than that, you do your routine, you know, yearly kind of service to make sure everything is, you know, fluids and normal stuff. And at that time, when, you know, if you notice anything, take care of it before it becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah.
If you know, put stuff off, deferred maintenance becomes, you know, a much heftier bill than it would have to be if you just take care of it, you know, from the start.
So one thing that a lot of people probably don't know is that this has a dog leg.
Yes.
So first is actually the bottom left position.
Yeah.
So that's part of the experience of driving this car, the sound and everything's analog.
Yes.
You've driven a lot of Ferraris, you've driven a lot of cars. What's the feeling like? What's the experience? Why do you like driving a car like this versus, like, I don't know, 430 F12? This guy, you know, this guy wants to have you give him a little gas.
Something about, first, a gated shift to me, being a Ferrari lover, there's nothing quite like it. Just hearing the clinking as you go into the gears. I mean, a manual in general is a lot of fun, but there's just something so precise and satisfying about hearing the clink as it goes into its gate that I just, you know, you don't get with other cars, and I love it. It fulfills something in me that just makes me happy.
Yeah. And what's it like driving a car of this size? Because for a coupe, this is not like a Miata. This is a Z4.
No,
it's
so
big.
Testarossas, they actually, as the continuation of like the Boxer, they actually put the radiators in the rear or on the sides, and that is why it's so wide. So this car actually has a much wider rear end than front, and it is takes a little getting used to, because you want to make sure not to, like, accidentally scrape up against something, because you think, well, okay, the front made it, the back should.
Yeah.
But because it's so wide and big, it actually handles really well, and feels very much like, almost like a go-kart when you're driving it, because it feels kind of glued to the road. Even though you got a big 12-cylinder behind you, it just, you know, it has that extra width to it that helps it just grip well. you know, and drive like it's on rails a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think we'll finish off with, you had a Lamborghini parked behind us in the shop. What's the biggest difference you feel between Lamborghinis and Ferraris of previous generations? I mean, I feel like now, you know, the competition's like, there's still a big difference driving an F8 versus, let's say, like a STO or a Performante. But is there a different character that you feel when you drive?
Yes.
Lamborghini versus Ferrari?
There is. So Lamborghinis are a bit more, especially the older ones, they can be a little more, like the gearbox is definitely a little rougher. Now, Ferraris do have their own gearbox issues, but Lambos they're just a little stiffer and a little more like you gotta kind of beg with them sometimes to do what you want. But overall, I feel like a lot of Ferraris were based off of racing, race cars, all of that. That's all what it was about. Whereas Lamborghini, well, still, you know, definitely a very fast car. That wasn't Ferruccio Lamborghini's like goal. Whereas Enzo, his whole thing was about racing. So Lamborghinis, especially some of the older ones, they're a little bit more like based on the flashiness, I feel like, than based off of like pure race car, like derivatives, you know, from, and you know, Lambos are plenty fast in their own, and plenty of Lamborghinis have beat Ferraris. That was great. No, plenty of Lamborghinis have beat Ferraris, hands down. Like the rug, sorry, stupid thing. All right.
That's a quirk with this car.
Yeah, the rug will slide forward and hit the throttle a little bit. So a lot of times with these cars, I'll actually take out the throw rug because it'll slide, and it's a floor pedal, not a hanging pedal. And I took out the throw rug on top, but the bottom one wasn't affixed in place, so it slid forward a bit, which, you know, is exciting when you're driving. I've had that happen to me a few times, and yeah, it catches your attention pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been super fun. If you guys want to see more, there is so much over on the Ferraris Online channel, which is linked down below. So check it out. You'll learn a ton. I learned a ton. Thank you again. And I'll see you in the next video.